All right, so let's talk about free speech. So something interesting happened in the UK. Now, we've been watching, of course, with bated breath what actually unfolds in the United Kingdom as it relates to the extradition of Julian Assange. The very person responsible for that extradition has just now released this sweeping new threat to free expression. Here's the declassified UK article by Richard Norton Taylor. So I want to kind of go through this and we'll pick this apart. Priti Patel's sweeping new threat to free expression. Journalists and staff of civil society groups in the UK could be sentenced to life imprisonment for offenses committed under the government's proposed new national security bill. It would be an offense to disclose leaked information that would prejudice the safety of interests of the UK. What constitutes such prejudice would be entirely a matter for ministers to decide, and there would be no defense to argue that the publication was in the public interest. The sweeping new threat to the freedom of expression is contained in the new National Security Bill, which MPs are due to vote on for the first time today. The bill is being championed by Home Secretary Priti Patel.
Now, she, if you remember, is the person who is responsible for the final decision on whether or not Julian Assange will be extradited to the United States. There's been calls from the European Union and all manner of leaders saying, please don't do this. But if this gives us any indication on how she leans on what Assange is accused of, which is exposing classified information through media, right? Then this may be something, if she in fact decides to extradite him, that she can sort of lean back on and say, well, you know how I feel about this, right? People who expose government information are guilty of something that threatens us all. So then I have to stick to my principles.
Yeah, but as the piece points out, like journalists who receive some funding from foreign governments are at risk of committing offenses under this bill.
Right.
So like what is
from foreign money at all, right? So let's say a journalist is working for the New York Times, but is stationed in the UK, right? The New York Times is an American company.
Right.
And so that would qualify, whereas someone who's working for, say, the BBC would not.
Well, I also love, and Tara Reid is joining us, who has some thoughts on this as well, who has been censored and taken to task by many publications in the mainstream media, who formerly worked for then Senator Joe Biden and was raked across the coals in the mainstream media. I mean, it's so broad, Tara, that how are they going to make any sort of determination, right? They could pick and choose what media organizations they want to say are bad and therefore then threaten you with life imprisonment. I can't even understand how this bill is even being proposed.
Yeah, I don't either, but it's the ruling class, right? They're closing the curtains on their behavior. And so it's going to be very difficult for people to get to truth. And, you brought up Julian Assange, which is, a good point that she might be leaning back on that. And Julian Assange is an Australian citizen being extradited to the U.S. On espionage charges for publishing and being and being a journalist. And, so every journalist in the world should be concerned, or any citizen actually in the world. So yes, it opens the door legally for them to basically censor and suppress any kind of bad stories as well that might come out about them, right? Like any kind of, things that they are doing that's nefarious would be covered up and not even right.
So in the book, This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends, Nicole Perlroth was one of the New York Times reporters who actually received the Edward Snowden documents. And she was brought into this piece because originally The Guardian had it, and The Guardian couldn't publish it themselves because the United Kingdom already doesn't have the same free press laws that the United States did. So The Guardian purposely brought in American journalists because they would be more protected to publish this information, right? So what does that tell us? about this law is that like they claim to only be going after foreign sources, but we know that British sources of media already are not protected. So this would preclude anything like that from happening again. They would not. So, the Guardian would not be able to bring in the New York Times and be more protected again. This would not happen according to this law.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's really, it's going to be very difficult for people to navigate and feel safe coming forward with events that are going on, whether it be a war, whether it be, some sort of corruption that's happening within the UK government or whatever's going on. But, they're extending this, and the US was trying to do, the department, the Ministry of Truth or whatever, Homeland Security was trying to do the same thing in a different way, but make it an institutionalized department that would decide what is disinformation. What they're doing is a step further. They're criminalizing speech, basically. So they're taking free speech and they're criminalizing it. So everyone should be paying attention right now. It's a big story, and I'm wondering what the result of the vote was.
Yeah, and another sort of side of the story, we talked about Julian Assange, Stella Assange, Stella Morris. I think that's how you say her last name. My last name is Morris.
Because it's like our name, Morris, but one R.
One R is missing something. But Stella Assange, she published this story. It was an interview that she did about life on raising children while Julian Assange is in jail waiting for extradition. And she describes this sort of, she just goes like a barbed wire nest, I think is how she describes it in the piece, where when she goes and sees Julian, what does she say? I'm going to pull it up here. When we are together.
It's a really harrowing tale about how she tries to raise her two boys with some sense of normalcy and get them to know their father, because she has this foreboding sense that their time is limited and that if he is actually extradited, which again, it's sort of hanging on a moment, that he won't survive it. And that already he had either a stroke or a heart attack, I can't remember which, just last fall. And she thinks the United States government will take him and lock him up in the harshest corner of the harshest prison, and he will not get a fair shake. And it's a really, really well-written piece about someone who has a broken heart over her husband who has not been charged with anything.
Tara, I just want to read this quote from the piece, and you can chime in on this too. It says, our time together is running out, Stella writes. When Julian is taken from his cell to the prison yard, he tilts his head up so his eyes can focus on the distance. If he narrows his eyes, the double razor wire above becomes a blur. Beyond is the open sky. Julian recently discovered a family of nesting magpies. He spotted their home subversively nestled between the razor wire. I think our family is like those magpies. When we are together, we are always a few meters from their nest. Our children, Gabriel, who is 5, and Max is only 3, only have memories of their father within the brutal surroundings of this prison. Think about that. Just absolutely awful. And of course, he faces 175 years behind bars. In this prison sentence, a maximum 175 years. And she thinks that that's going to be the end of him. Tara, what is your take on this?
Yeah, that story, I read that yesterday. It's just heartbreaking because you really hear the poignancy of trying to parent and be a mother and a wife in these circumstances that are so dire, because it's like watching a slow motion execution. And that's what this amounts to. Yeah. And the U.S. government is making it very clear to whistleblowers, this is what will happen to you. And they're not showing any mercy or any compassion or humanity in Julian Assange's case.
She brings up Mike Pompeo, of course, and she pulls no punches about Mike Pompeo.
Well, she links to an article that says that, and I don't know how this missed my radar last week, that Mike Pompeo, former Secretary of State, was summoned by a Spanish court to explain an alleged government plot to assassinate Julian Assange. And they're looking into whether or not a Spanish company participated in spying on him while he was at the Ecuadorian embassy in order to play this out and get him. I didn't know this. This is awful.
And he was the director of the CIA under Trump. And so, I mean,
right. I mean, they remember, I don't know if you saw some of the early articles on this, but they even were justifying that they could have a shootout in London if they had to, but they were really seriously plotting to murder Julian Assange. And, and he did, and this kind of links back to Ukraine, doesn't it? Because remember, a lot of the war crimes that were exposed, part of that was the Maidan coup in 2014 and the famous, Victoria Nuland's exchange exposing the American involvement with that.
This is literally the plot of a Bourne Identity movie.
Yes.
It's like someone who knows too much about the government. How many times do I say this about a movie? Like, we're covering something and I'm like, there's a movie about this. It shouldn't be real.
I know.
Movies, have you noticed that Top Gun, right, in the United States, they're having, I saw a story recently that they're having military recruiters in the lobbies of the theaters to try to get young men and women to enlist.
Yeah,
actually,
I saw that right outside. I saw that same story. They're all lined up outside of the movie theater as you walk out. Like, hey, you want to join? You want to join the Navy?
There really is no better way to drum up enthusiasm than Top Gun. We have a friend who said that one of his commanders actually took Tom Cruise up in a flight for some reason. And I was like, on taxpayer dollars? That's so wasteful. And he's like, it's not, because when the first Top Gun came out, military enrollment went through the roof because it's very effective.
Yeah, that's why they put all these war game video. That's why that's why the military, the U.S. Army, funded a first person shooter military game in the just like Call of Duty. They built their own Call of Duty military game.
It has since been taken down, but only within the last few weeks.
Well, and that's why they also specifically go after gamers for the drone program.
Yes. Yeah, because to them, it's like Ender's Game, right? You don't actually have to physically be on a battlefield. You can be in Oklahoma and you can carry out drone strikes, and you don't actually have to then you can go back to your house later that night in Oklahoma when earlier in the day you were bombing Syria.
Barack Obama became very famous for that, didn't he? That's the legacy he lives. So many people, and I have to admit this because I was a Democrat. I voted for Obama. And despite, what I had been through, I believed that this would be the person that could lead. And right out the gate, I think his first day in office, he droned people. And then, of course, Daniel Hale came forward and talked about how 90% of those drone strikes were hitting civilians. And for that, Daniel Hale lost his freedom, and he still hasn't been pardoned.
Disgusting. And of course, last week we covered here on the show the Syria update on the drone strike that killed a number of civilians, and no one lost their job over that at all. Of course.
It was a mistakes were made type
mistakes
thing.
were made, but we felt good about those mistakes, and we're all good about that. So nothing to see here. We will continue.
Some perfunctory words.
Yeah.
And we're moving on.
Thank you so much for subscribing to our channel. We've been banned, we've been blocked, we've been censored. That's why we started our own website, to stay connected with you for free.
That's right. So head on over to redacted.inc and make sure you're connected with us. You can sign up again at redacted.inc, not .com.